My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
My name is Beef Pork Ribs. I'm a fine repository of esoteric knowledge, which I suppose most people would qualify as geeky. Though I dabble in many fandoms, my main areas of expertise are anime, movies, and Belgian comics, with a strong recent insurgency of D&D.
Our mission is to bring nerd and geek culture to the masses
by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, comics, graphic novels, TV, cartoons, animation, nerds are geeks, entertainment culture. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power. Nerds and geeks, come gather around the scene. Come and join us in the Bat Jar. Come and tune into Average Joe and his team. Lots of room here in the Bat Jar. When the newest nerdy news drops, these podcast pals put it under the scope. DC, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars, cinematic, multiverse. It's mega Christmas, Grinch's franchise. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope.
And it doesn't matter how long it takes us to do it, we'll do it anyways. Because we like doing things well. That was my intro to this week's topic.
So, Beeper, I was in the car today and I'm like, maybe I should start alternating with Beef Pork Ribs so that he can start introducing the episodes. But then I was like, is he going to do the Obi-Wan Kenobi hello there? Or, what would be your thing? Would you just do the same thing or would you have a different kind of intro line?
Probably would do the same thing for the sake of continuity, although I just had this sudden urge to just start singing "What's Up, People." But wait, did you watch Death Note, right?
I saw some of Death Note and then was spoiled for the ending, so.
Oh, okay. Well, it's because the opening and closing song for the second half of the series is by this band called Maximum the Hormones, and they are a Japanese screamo band. And one of them is "What's Up, People." And the end of the song is just the main singer just screaming "What's up, people" over and over.
That is a deep cut. That is a deeper cut than me saying hello there.
Much deeper cut, and nobody would ever understand it.
That's okay. I saw on Thursday or Friday this week that the Legend of Vox Machina, the animated series adapting Critical Role's adventures, has dropped on Amazon Prime Video. And you seemed pretty excited about it previously. So have you had a chance to watch any of it yet?
Yep, I have. We watched it on Thursday. It's a little strange for good reason, because like watching a show with a fully fleshed out and written character versus watching people play a character, which some weeks will be a little bit like different. Even like I don't know. It's kind of different. Mostly, it's pretty like it is good. The animation is quite good. The voices are pretty great. David Tennant is in the first two episodes. Yeah, good sight gags, Easter eggs. Like the whole thing looks really good, and the characters work well, but you don't really get into the story until the third episode, and even that is kind of a setup for the main storyline that's going to cover the rest of the season. So it's good, but it's also a little weird.
Yeah, I watched the first episode and I was quite surprised by some of the stuff that's in that episode. Having never watched Critical Role, I'm like, maybe this is just what Critical Role is like, and maybe it's normal for characters to vomit and characters to swear this much.
So, yeah, the swearing definitely was a thing. The throwing up, specifically Keyleth, I mean, it was kind of this joke because she was... Marisha, who plays her, is the youngest member of the group, and they made a lot of jokes about her being naive and her character being naive. Same thing with her casting a spell that makes things worse. That was kind of just like a running gag. I think that's in the first episode. It's the first or second, but there was a running gag about her spells making things worse, and so there's kind of there's a few that are kind of interesting, but like I knew it was going to be uh not a children's show.
Yes, yes. For anyone who's wondering, the uh, Critical Role, so the Dungeons and Dragons campaign that is like a thing on YouTube, now has an animated series basically adapting their adventures. It's on Amazon Prime Video exclusively, and it is not for children. If you have children and you want to introduce them to Dungeons and Dragons, do not do not use this.
Don't use Critical Role generally.
Yeah.
Like, they're great, but they are a group of friends who are adults who are not censoring the fact that they're a group of friends who are adults.
Yeah. But on that same vein, have you had a chance to watch anything of Peacemaker yet?
What is it on in Canada?
It's on Crave.
Oh, so no, I don't have Crave. I do want to though. It sounds like it's really good.
I will just pass it along to you. I mean, I will encourage you to go and get a Crave subscription because there's promo deals on or whatever. But I mean, again, fair warning to people, kind of like Vox Machina, Peacemaker is not for children. There's lots of adult content, violence, swearing, nudity, drug use. Like it takes full advantage of the fact that it's meant for adults. So,
I mean, if you've seen the movie that this is a spin-off of, you should know this already.
yes.
Spoilers for The Suicide Squad, even though we talked about it on the podcast. It's not for kids or even some teenagers.
And then the other kind of show that's generating a lot of conversation right now is the Book of Boba Fett, which I know you just said you've only had a chance to see the first episode of, but I'm all caught up now. There's only 2 episodes left after this. So there's gonna be 7, which is an odd number for season episodes in a TV season, but I guess that's what they're gonna do.
Yeah, I mean, the first episode was good. It was setting up a lot of things, and I am excited to watch it because I've heard not just good things, but I've heard, and this was something that I wasn't necessarily surprised, but happy to hear. I heard good things from Star Wars Extended Universe fans.
Okay.
And that's a pretty high praise for those.
That's a hard audience to please at this point. So if you're subscribed to Amazon Prime Video or Crave or Disney Plus, you can check out any of these shows we've just sort of mentioned here in brief. I'd recommend all of them. Just know your audience or know who the show is designed for when you're getting into Peacemaker or The Legend of Vox Machina. Just fair warning there. Today, we are talking about an anime film called Redline. And Beeper, I'm guessing, this is my guess. I don't want to assume anything. Oh, you own it on Blu-ray. Okay. Because when I tried to research this movie, there wasn't a whole lot out there about it. But what I did see was a video from that super eye patch wolf guy on YouTube. And my assumption was
mentioned him before on the podcast.
Yes. So people who don't know, Beeper's a huge fan of Super Eye Patch Wolf. So correct me if I'm wrong, but is your secret origin segment here that you found out about this movie from Super Eye Patch Wolf?
Yes, it is actually. And then, yeah, he made a really good video about why movies like this should be made, and it was quite compelling, and I watched the movie, and I agreed, and I got it on Blu-ray.
And then from there, it ended up in the bat jar.
Yeah, and I've showed it to a few people, Mjolnir being one of them, because I think it's a movie worth sharing, and a movie that, I quite thoroughly enjoy, personally.
So we haven't really had many episodes talking about a specific anime film before. This is kind of a first for us.
I thought we talked about the Demon Slayer, but I guess it's because it came out in theaters, right?
Yeah, like we don't generally go back and review old anime films, and this isn't really going to be a review either because we're not the video essay type of people.
Had the Bad Jar started in 2009?
No, we didn't start till 2016.
Yeah. Yeah, you would. That would have been your last year of high school. Never mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh boy. All right, so let's just dive on in. I don't, I hadn't before you mentioned it. There was really my secret origin is Beeper said we should put this movie called Redline in the Bat Jar, and I got admit I misunderstood. I thought it was some anime series that I can't even remember the actual name of it. It's doesn't matter. Point is, it's not what I thought it was, and I only watched it this week for the first time. So, without any further ado, Beeper, give us the Blu-ray case description for Redline.
From the director of Animatrix World Record and the studio that brought you Summer Wars, Ninja Scroll, and Paprika, comes one of the most exciting and visually inventive films in years, Redline!
I wonder if I should actually read it. Yeah, you know what? Redline is about the biggest and most deadly racing tournament in the universe. Only held once every 5 years, everyone wants to stake their claim to fame, including JP, a reckless daredevil driver oblivious to speed limits and his ultra customized car. All the while, organized crime and militaristic governments want to leverage the race for their own ends. Among the other elites rival drivers of the tournament, JP falls for the alluring Sonoshi, but will she prove his undoing, or can a high-speed romance survive a mass destruction race? I was reading, for those who didn't catch that, the actual Blu-ray description since I had the Blu-ray with me.
That is a first, and it's very fitting.
Yeah, no, I think that covers it. It's about fast racing in the future in space, but also politics, kind of, but not really. It's mostly just about the race. I guess I think the thing that the Blu-ray case doesn't really touch on, but that I feel a need to mention is that like it's the kind of universe where like media events are so like all consuming to society. Like the race isn't just like a really big race for the people in it. It's like the premier sporting and entertainment event in the galaxy.
Now, has Jam Jam seen the movie yet?
She has not.
Okay. So
We'll have
Jam
to
Jam's commentary today is purely just out of delight of
speculative. Yeah.
being a podcaster. Well, this is a film that was technically released in 2009 because it made its debut at a film festival, but apparently it didn't get released in Japanese theaters till 2010. So at the time of our recording here, the movie is at least 12 years old. From my general knowledge of animated films, it generally takes up to 4 years for one of these movies to get made from start to finish. But Redline took 7 years to finish.
It's well, I mean, so also something that wasn't on the Blu-ray cover. This is a hand-drawn animated feature film, which you just don't do anymore. And even when it started, like I guess it started production in 2002. You know, most people did mostly CG with maybe some hand drawn, but even hand drawn animation like usually is like will be like drawn on computers. Like it's still like, you know, there's still an artist with a tablet, but it's on the computer. This was made on actual like drawn slates, and then the only thing that was added that was computer generated was some of the background and effects afterwards. But generally, like it was fully hand drawn on paper before being, you know, filmed and then added special effects on, which is crazy because nobody does that.
Yeah, and I would recommend this movie just for the visual experience of it, because the animation in this movie is just breathtaking, for lack of a better word.
It is like it's mind-boggling that this movie got made, but I guess enough people were into it enough to make it work, because it clearly was like being pushed forward really hard by the creators. Like they knew what they wanted to do and they did it. but they also had to stick to their guns for 7 years in order to get it done, and that takes a lot of dedication, especially for something where you are making a product that is more expensive than average and less, a little more difficult maybe to sell to studios because it is not what people do normally, but I think the results definitely make up for it.
Yeah. And I don't know the business side of anime very well. I know the names of like the different studios that are involved in making anime. And for people who don't know, it actually is a big deal if you're in the know and you know about the different studios that are involved in producing anime, because what's produced from one company will look different from a show or a movie produced by a different company, and different studios have different styles. So people most likely have heard of like Studio Ghibli, where Hayao Miyazaki made it a name for himself, or making his kind of movie. And so if you watch a Studio Ghibli movie, it's going to look a certain way, it's going to feel a certain way, like they make a certain kind of film. I suppose now if I make the comparison to American animation, I suppose it's kind of similar if you think of like what Disney does versus what DreamWorks or Illumination Entertainment does. But I feel like there's the ways in which the different Japanese studios go about animating things still feels stylistically different enough. Am
I
I
think
making any sense?
Yeah, I think the bigger difference in like the difference between major Japanese animation studios and major like North American ones is that it's not just the art style that's different. It's also the way that things are animated, and there are some difference like between Disney, DreamWorks, Pixar, etc. But it's a lot more subtle unless you have like very big different. Like I feel like if you had something animated by a DreamWorks team or a Disney team that was using the same character models, it would be harder to tell the difference than if it was something that was animated by like Studio Ghibli or or Madhouse. Like you could tell from the way things moved, from the way things, the style of the animation, even with the same models, you could still tell the difference.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so when I saw this was a film made by Madhouse, I'm like, okay, I know that anime studio. I know that they've been known for, I guess you could say, high quality productions. But the director, someone named Takashi Koike, I'd never heard of him before. But then once I watched a video today where they kind of like broke down like his career before Redline, and you see that he, in his role as an animator, he was always trying to make very fluid looking action and make things look like they were moving as if it was live action. Because a lot of animation, it just sort of looks like there's maybe like one body part moving at a time kind of thing, like almost like a puppet. Whereas with this guy, it's like, if there's two characters fighting, he wants like the whole body to be moving and not just like the hands and the feet, which because it's all being drawn on paper, literally every single movement has to be a separate drawing, which that's a lot of time and energy.
Yeah, and it's not just the character models. Like they put a lot of effort into making like the vehicles um not just feel like everything is moving, but also feel dynamic. There's a lot of like not quite rubber hose, if you know what rubber hose animation is, where like to emphasize it's the kind of animation that was done in the 1930s to 50s mostly, in which you would extend limbs to over emphasize motion, and so the characters kind of move very fluidly, but also like if you think of like the old Popeye cartoons, or older Mickey Mouse cartoons, like the way that they move their limbs kind of feel like they are rubber hoses, like they're a very fluid, like there aren't specifically joints in them, and there's a little bit of that, but also just a lot of like uh, space dilation when speeds get really high in the movie, especially like the amount of screen dilation that happens in the final sprint of the movie, is to ridiculous extents, like where the character model will Like the face of the main character and the pompadour on his head will get stretched the entire length of the screen to emphasize how fast like the acceleration is going. And it's like that kind of fluidity and movement is something that is uh really sells the action, and also is, I know this from talking to people who have done animation, very hard and expensive and long to do, which I feel like I have showed this movie to people who have done animation. They're like, wow, that was a crazy movie, that took forever. Like they would just look at shots and say like, that took forever to make.
Yeah, and apparently the goal of the production team was to give their audience sensory overload. And to that I say, mission accomplished, because there's not a scene that goes by in this movie where there isn't like 3 or 4 different things going on in the background. Like, of course, this is an audio podcast, so we're trying to explain what this movie looks like, and we're not going to do it justice, because literally the movement, like there's so much movement and so much energy, and it's supposed to be these high speed race car, flying car kind of thing. You feel the force of how fast these vehicles are moving. Like when it zips by, the whole structures around will like shake, and there's wind and people will go flying. I've never seen anything like it in animation, to be frank.
Yeah, and I think I would be remiss not to mention also the colors, because like it is very very colorful, but like very strong colors. Like the style has strong lines and very colorful colors. Like the degree of saturation in the colors is pretty high. Like it's, you like the reds aren't like the yellow won't be like a mustard yellow or like an almost cream. It's gonna be like very, bright yellow. Same thing. Like all the colors are very bright and contrast each other, and and have really dark dynamic shadows. And like a lot of the shadows are actually black, which is also kind of unusual, but also creates this kind of feel that makes it look highly contrasted and makes the color look more colorful too.
Yeah, and the director was partially influenced by Frank Miller, the American comic book writer and artist, who heavily uses black in his artwork and in his shadows. And even I noticed, even with like the outlines of all the characters, like they have these thick black outlines, and it did kind of give it like almost like an American comic book feel, which kind of placed it more in my comfort zone in a sense.
Yeah, and yet you still had sensory overload during it and had to stop watching. I think that's pretty impressive, because you have, I know you do watch a lot of animation, and so you do have kind of a higher threshold than the average person probably for that.
Yeah, I don't know. That's the thing. I don't know if I turned it off because I'm like, okay, I'm overstimulated, but I just sort of reached a point where it's like I'm almost getting bored, because it's just constantly coming more and more high energy, lots of stuff moving on the screen kind of animation, where I'm like, I'm desensitized to it. It's not impressive anymore, because I've been sitting here for an hour watching this kind of happen nonstop. Like even in the quiet moments of Redline, there's still lots of interesting things visually happening on the screen. And so I kind of felt like I had to take a break, because I was becoming desensitized and the animation wasn't as impressive anymore. And to me, I want to be able to appreciate the work they put into this. That whole 7 years, and that basically meant I had to like turn it off. And this is where I bring up the question: like, should this have just been a series? Because if it had only been in like 20-25 minute sprints every week, I feel like it might have been better remembered as like, wow, look at this amazing piece of work.
I think the problem is like it's easier to sell a high budget show, but like a high budget movie than a high budget show. Like especially given how long it ended up taking to produce, there probably would have been a lot more pressure to cut corners in order to make it a TV show. Like I think you still like I think there is something to that, and you probably could have had like maybe if it was done like as a series of OVAs, then maybe you could have kind of captured that feel. But even there, I think I think there also isn't enough story to actually make it a series. Like, you could go into the backstory of some of the racers a bit more and like the relationship with each other, but I think that ultimately it's actually kind of one of the strengths of the movie is that it relies mostly on character design and some very small interactions during the race to kind of get across who these people are, other than the main character and his love interest, who get way more screen time than all the other ones. But it's, I feel like if they did make it a series, it also would take away from what I find to be one of the strength, also like the kind of absurdity of what's going on in the background of the race.
Yeah.
Because
You make a good point. This is very much style over substance. This is very much the kind of movie Zack Snyder would make. And that was my other problem, is that the story is pretty basic. It's pretty bare bones. It's pretty simple.
yeah,
There's some complicated world building going on in the background, but in terms of the actual main story, it's pretty simple. And unfortunately, if you're not getting mesmerized by the high quality animation, you're going to be kind of left wanting more from what the story is telling you.
I think when we were talking about it just before we started recording, you said that the main character reminded you of Space Dandy. And I think that that's like, generally speaking, this movie does kind of remind me of Space Dandy. Not just the style of animation, but also, or the style of characters, but also the fact that there is this like big cosmic opera that should, like, you feel should be the focus. Like, there is this, because the race happens on this planet, which is like a very strong military planet that's supposed to be like fiercely independent, and they're trying to hide their secrets, but the race is like revealing the secrets, and everybody's like kind of panicking, and you know and I think, and it is kind of one of those weird things where it's like, this should be the main plot, but it isn't. It's a race. There's this race happening on the planet, and that's what the main plot of the movie is. And I think it's, to me, it is kind of refreshing in a way, because there are a lot, like, I don't know, I feel like, especially with like movie universes that are being made, there's so many movies that are just like focusing so much on the big picture and like building, the next stage or the next phase. If you're talking about like the MCU, like, even, and like, we talked about Hawkeye, I liked it a lot, but then there were some things in it that just felt like this is just a setup for other things, and it doesn't necessarily, it isn't relevant to what's happening necessarily. And like, Hawkeye is maybe a worse example, not as good an example as others, but like, there's a lot of movie that's what, there's things in them that you're like, oh, they're setting up something, and that's the only reason this exists. Whereas I feel like in Redline, the world things that happen, you only know about them because they are going to directly influence the race.
Yeah, and I think there's a comparison to be made to things like Hawkeye, where it's meant to be a much smaller scale story. It takes place in this larger world, and Redline's kind of like that. It's this simple story of this race car race that happens to take place in this world where there's these other things going on. But unlike Hawkeye, where we have access to the rest of the story through other movies and shows, with this, we're only getting the glimpses of the larger story based on the kind of the scenes that the movie gives us. So we only know as much about the larger, space opera that the movie gives us to understand.
Yeah, and I think, like, and I do understand this movie. I wanted to talk about it because it's mostly because it's gorgeous, and I agree that more people should watch it, because like, it is a movie that didn't have massive financial success, especially considering how expensive it was to make and how long it took to get it done. It, you would have expected it to do really, really well, and that everybody would be talking about it, but it's kind of like, I hadn't heard about it until a specific YouTuber talked about it, and you hadn't heard about it until I talked about it. And, we are more in tune with what's being released in Japan than the average person, and it's the kind of movie I feel we should have known about, like, especially people like us. But I mean, generally, anime fans don't know about it, and it's yeah, it's not a whole series, it's not a big thing, it's not like a big Shonen Jump title, but I think it's definitely worth it and worth seeing, and could be just as influential. Especially for people who like animation, watch this movie because it's a masterclass in what you can do through that medium.
Yeah, I don't know if I can say this is a great movie. I think it's a great showcase of animation for sure. I don't know if there are many or if any other movies that have been made that showcase the not the limits but the abundance of two-dimensional kinetic energy animation out there. And there is kind of like this narrative associated with Redline. It's this tragedy of this was an original idea, wasn't based on any source material. They went ahead and made it as a movie. They had poured 7 years of time and energy into making this thing, and then it didn't really find an audience. It didn't really take off. And it's been in recent years, it's kind of falling into the cult classic kind of status because lots of people like you and like me are discovering it after the fact, and we acknowledge there's something good about it. In a way, I think this is going to become like this is like your Batman Mask of the Phantasm.
I don't know if it'll ever hit. I feel like it would have to have had an anime associated with it to hit that level, but I like the comparison. And
No,
coming
I
from me,
mean like
that's high
I
praise.
I mean to say that I campaign and tell people to watch Mask of the Phantasm, and you're kind of doing that now for Redline. Now, you're right. There's more people. I'm not. I'm in less of a minority because there's a lot of people who say people should watch Mask of the Phantasm, but you're certainly leading the charge, at least in our podcast community here, for people to actually check out Redline.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's why I wanted to put it in the bad jar too. I realized after it came out that I'm like, oh man, I have a lot to say about how cool this movie is, but it might have to be spoilery, or there isn't like. You're right. There's less substance to the movie, but I think it's also like it hit me kind of interestingly when I rewatched it, because I rewatched it not very recently, but that a lot of the character design is very like does very much seem like it comes from another studio. Like even just the old guy mechanic who helps JP fix his car kind of looks like he should be from a Ghibli movie, but because he's got kind of long insect-like limbs, and like it seems a lot more like fantastical, but they still managed to fit everything into this universe. And I think that's it's also, again, maybe not the best plot driven movie, but there's definitely a lot in the background that sells the fact that it's a lived in universe.
Yeah, the
Like,
world building is incredible.
yeah, the amount of like different, like the amount of different races, but like I don't know if you know how sometimes you've got like all the different races in the way that Star Wars does it, where there's like one person of every single alien race, but you don't really get a feel for any of them. It's just, oh, that's cool. There's diversity here. Whereas this, like you had enough of like groups of different types of aliens, either when they're watching the TV or in reacting or around the tracks, and you get a bit more of an idea of what kind of people they are.
Yeah. I bring back up Mask of the Phantasm because when that movie didn't do well financially, it sort of communicated to Hollywood that, oh, we shouldn't make animated superhero movies because this one didn't do well. And unfortunately, that's changed a little bit in recent years. Thank God for Spider-Verse. But with Redline, I think I watched the Eye Patchwell video, and I think he does make a very good point at the end to say, since Redline did not do well, anime studios kind of moved away from making big budget anime films based on original ideas. If you look at the anime films that have been made in recent years, they're all more or less adapting source material like anime TV shows do. There are some exceptions, but even the ones that are being made kind of follow the same visual style, and it doesn't allow for the variety that something like Redline did.
I think also follow the same kind of narrative lines as well. Like there is a little bit of JP that's like an anime protagonist, but not really. Like he doesn't have like he has a slight Deus Ex Machina at the end, but it's not like. And it is kind of the power of love that propels him over rather than the power of friendship, but it doesn't feel like he is overcoming all the greatest obstacles to become the Hokage, you know? It's not it feels very personal to him that he just, his motivation is he just wants to race, right? Like it's not he doesn't have lofty ideals. He doesn't push the agenda of what racing should be like any further. You know, other than the fact that he doesn't think he should throw the race for the mob, but that's not, that's not a very high level of ideals for a main character, especially in like an anime.
I happened to watch another anime film this week called Weathering with You. It's from Makoto Shinkai, who directed Your Name. And admittedly, I watched the movie just because I liked Your Name. And I'm like, oh, it's the same guy? I'll watch it for sure. And wouldn't you know it, visually, tonally, stylistically, even some of the same musical artists contribute to the soundtrack. It's a different movie, but it very similar to Your Name. Like there are a lot of similarities being made. And that extends to the quality of the animation. Like feature film animation in Japan is breathtaking, and most of it is still done traditionally 2D animation. It looks great. But I can't help but think of what Eyepatch Wolf said, that Japan learned the wrong lesson from Redline, and now the anime films that are being made just sort of feel a lot of the same, and we're not getting as much creativity or variety. Like Redline is this hard, well, not hard sci-fi, but it's definitely more like a soft space fantasy setting that has, frankly, races that put the pod racing scenes in Star Wars to shame.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is it's sad. Like I don't know, I have this weird, and maybe I don't know if this is relevant to talking about this movie, but this kind of strange um relationship with anime, which I think you can probably relate to on some level. Some of it is caused by the fact that I'm a teacher, and I hear my students talking about anime in an extremely different way than anime was talked about when I was in high school, and I find that the problem is that like there are a lot of people have a different idea of what they consider to be classics now than when I started watching, and probably when you did as well. Like One Piece still exists, but like I remember when I started watching One Piece, it wasn't that popular. In fact, it was the butt of many jokes in the anime community. People were like, oh yeah, it's that manga about pirates that's getting to be too long and is never going to last. And then it became one of the big three, and now it's still kind of a monolith in the industry. But I feel like more and more you're getting less original content. Like you're getting less of your Cowboy Bebops, less of like, and yeah, the anime industry has never had that many original content series, but I feel like there were more, and this is something like that, where it's like it is really nice to have something that is like you said, like nothing else, and that is fully original, and they can do well, and I think they should be encouraged, because if you never take a risk, you never have things like I said, Cowboy Bebop or Afro Samurai, which is not for everybody, but it was a really interesting and fully original idea, and it's yeah, I guess and Redline just kind of reminds me a little bit of that kind of older or more classic anime, even though like I guess it is pretty old now, older than I thought, but like it doesn't feel like, to me it still feels like it's still in the modernish era. Like it is still in the 2000s. It's not like, the 80s and 90s classic anime.
It did
But
come
it
out 2 decades ago at this point.
yeah, but it's still flying under the radar.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I watched the dub version because that was the version I could find. And I'll just say the animation is so good in Redline that it really makes the dubbing experience really difficult, because the mouth movements are so specific to the Japanese dialogue that you can just see how they did their best. The dubbing people did their best to make the English dialogue match what the characters were actually saying. But what are you going to do? And the mouth movements are literally spelling out Japanese words, and you have to try and shove English dialogue in there. Like, they did the best they could. And I think that might have also, I mean, actually, I'm glad I watched the dubbed version, because I feel like if I read the subtitled version, I would have been reading and not noticing the animation as much.
I I've I believe I've done both. We watched it dubbed, right?
I assume so.
Yeah, I definitely, yeah, we watched it. I watched it dubbed when I showed it to Mjolnir. I watched it subbed as well. I guess there is, but there also isn't that much dialogue in a lot of the more, like, most of the dialogue are in scenes that are still beautiful but are a lot more understated, and you can kind of like,
Yeah, and the
yes,
music's
focus
great.
more on background things.
The music's great. The
Oh
soundtrack
yeah,
for the movie is great.
yeah. The soundtrack was also really good, and just, I think also, added to the high octane feeling of it. Because it goes from 0 to 100 very quickly.
Right. Now, I have some nitpicks that would fit into the spoilerverse. Do we want to have a jump into the spoilerverse for this movie?
Yeah.
All right. So we're going inside the spoilerverse. You know how to skip around this. There'll be a description or a thingy in the description. The movie ended very abruptly, and I did not buy the romance at all.
I mean, you're not the first person to say that. I think it definitely did end abruptly. But see, here's the thing: is that there's a lot of things in this movie that just again, like, I was actually hoping we'd go into the spoilerverse, because some of the things I was trying to say, like there's an Akira type monster that comes out of the earth, like that was clearly meant to be a reference to Akira. Like, not only is it a, like, misformed giant baby creature, but it gets shot by a space laser as well. Like, it was, I feel like there were a lot of things that were references, and, like, I don't know, the end of it just made me, personally, reminded me of, like, the original abrupt ending of Evangelion, where it's just like, it ends, everybody's waving at you, and clapping in this weird dream sequence that Shinji's having. And I don't know, I think, like, I see how it weakens the movie a little bit, but it also, I felt that you didn't have to buy the romance to buy it working. And I think that's, it's a thing that this movie does that I think more movies should do. That, like, it doesn't show a happily ever after. Like, I feel like there isn't that much of the romance to buy. I feel like, that JP and Sonoshi are still at the beginning of a relationship, and
They say "I
and
love you" pretty darn quickly, but yes, they're at the beginning of the relationship.
yeah, but that's the thing. Okay, but what was that line Keanu Reeves had in Speed? This is definitely like a high octane, or high
Yeah.
emotions
I'm
linking
just being
somebody.
mean at this point.
No, but I do think that it was intentionally made to not be like an end game relationship.
It's capturing a moment.
Yeah, it's capturing a moment, and which ostensibly was the point of Titanic, which people consider to be a great love story. even
Yeah.
though it is essentially the story about, the night this lady will never forget, or the 2 days that she'll never forget. And you know and I feel like, in Titanic they very specifically kind of touch on that, whereas in Redline they don't. But you kind of can imply that, they may or may not be together in a week, and it wouldn't make that much of a difference to either one of their lives, or they could stay together, and this might have been, a life-changing experience for both of them.
I enjoyed the Batman and Robin stand-ins they had in this.
Oh yeah, they were great. They especially their little heist to make the space laser not work.
Oh yeah. It was
I,
even like their car even had fins on it, and then there's like transformer cars in this. It's like it gets just when you think they can't do anything else crazy, they pull something else out of their
yeah,
proverbial butt.
I like the fact that a lot of the interaction, like some of the weapons, a lot of the weapons I think that were on the cars were very like racing game inspired. Like it really felt like something you'd see in Mario Kart, or in like, you
F-Zero.
know F-Zero or Lego Racer, like the cable that grabs a car and then pulls you in front of them and pulls them back, like, um or like the cars that are transforming between, like, that transform back and forth between like fighting people and then back into a vehicle, um or the guy who is an integral part, like the champion who is part of his car, like he is the engine and just
That seems
links
like a
himself to
conflict of interest.
yeah, but I loved his, just the fact that he was just unapologetically a cyborg who plugged into his machines, and it's like, and he's he'd won the red line like 5 times, and it's like,
Yeah.
okay, but
Yeah,
at
no
some point
cheating.
he's cheating. He is the machine, you know, and and they kind of say that, but don't really, like, but nobody complains about it because he's the champion.
Yeah. I don't know. There is I don't usually like this kind of stuff doesn't usually bother me as much, but with Sonoshi, she's introduced as like, okay, she's another competitor, she's another racer. And then by the end, she's literally just like his arm candy as they drive past the finish line. It's like, oh, you can win by getting in the car and winning with me. And it's like, what?
Yeah, although she is the one who pushes him to use the last, like, nitro blast that
I
ultimately wins them
suppose.
the race. But I do see what you mean. It does have some, this is clearly shonen anime-ish tropes to it, which tends to make love stories that don't stand the test of time.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of problems with the female representation in that movie.
Yeah. I think those were the only things I wanted to mention. Do you have any other spoilery thoughts?
Um, there's an Akira monster in the thing that just shows up. I don't think so. Like, spoiler, they win the race. It's not really a spoiler, but um, no, I think really, uh, similarly, I want people to watch this movie, and I want to be able to talk about it with more people. So, audience, watch this movie.
So coming around to final thoughts, Redline is an experience. It is a stunning piece of animation, and I would recommend people watch it just for the experience of the animation. Like, don't come to this expecting the greatest story ever told. Don't look for the greatest romance ever told, but come for some high octane action, the best space racing scenario you'll have ever see anywhere. You're going to be in for a good time. You just got to kind of set your expectations to the right place and maybe do it in parts so that you don't get overwhelmed by everything going on.
Yeah, I think similarly, like, go into this expecting to have your breath taken away. I saw this, um there was this, where is it? I had found the something somebody said, which I thought was hilarious. It was, yeah, if Scott Pilgrim versus the World was an assault on the sensation, Redline is a declaration of war. And I think if you go into it with that kind of, it will be a sensory overload. You will see crazy stuff, and you will kind of be like swept up into it. Yeah, watch this movie because that's exactly what it is, and it does a very good job of it.
And all right, Bat Cookies. Oh, this is hard. I'll give it like I'll give it a 2.9 out of 4 Bat Cookies.
Ah, man. I want to give it a 4, but I know that's not objectively true. I give the animation a 4 Bat Cookies, and I give the movie, I think honestly, a 3, maybe 3.1. I really enjoyed it, and I'm aware of the problems with it, but I don't know. I definitely was taken up by the experience and enjoy it quite a bit.
So Redline, I couldn't find it anywhere legally for streaming. So we won't say how I watched the movie, but it is available on Blu-ray, or at least it was. It was released in North America by a company called Manga Entertainment, I think they were referred to, but I don't think they actually exist anymore. So I'm not sure.
I believe it's the same company that originally licensed JoJo's.
Right. Okay. Manga Entertainment was a producer. Okay. Apparently, Funimation United Kingdom is now what Manga Entertainment used to be. So maybe it's a Funimation release now. Who knows? Anyway, the point is, I'm sure if you go online, you can try and find the Blu-ray for this thing.
Yeah,
It does exist.
Blu-ray sales can still help a movie 10 years later.
Yeah.
Somewhat.
Well, it's this is normally when you would look at the mail we get, but there is none, so we'll just move along here.
If you want to reach the show, you can send us an email at
batjarpodcast@gmail.com,
or you can tweet us at
the Bat Cookie Jar.
You can find the Bat Jar Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, because we got a channel. Share our posts on Facebook, write reviews, give our shows a rating. This will help all people join us inside the Bat Jar, and we appreciate it dearly.
So, Beeper, since the entirety of the Legend of Vox Machina is available, I'll give you the choice. I can go inside the Bat Jar here, pull out a topic at random, or we can make our whole next episode about the D&D show. Oh, yeah, there's only 3. Okay, never mind. I don't know what kind of drugs I was on, but clearly I was wrong, so we can't talk about that yet. So it's into the Bat Jar we go.
We'll go into the Bat Jar, yeah. And I think we kind of talked about Critical Role when we did that pretty big episode on D&D for you, right?
All right, you get first. What does this say?
The Mickey Mouse franchise.
That's right. We had my mom write in and tell us we should cover the Mickey Mouse franchise.
I like it. We'll have to get our former roommate in on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much content. I don't know how I'm gonna be able to. I don't even know what to watch, but that's it.
Yeah, well, the strength of Mickey Mouse.
Disney Plus. I'm sure a lot of it's on there.
We should maybe are we gonna limit ourselves to like films and shorts, or are we going all out? Because then are we are we gonna have to bring in the parks and the rides and Kingdom Hearts into it?
I think it might be interesting just having a conversation about Mickey Mouse the character, and then the kind of characters that surround him, and
and
all
kind
the
of
things
the
that
legacy
happen
they
with
have.
him. Yeah.
Yeah, because a few of them have spin-offs too. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, okay.
We'll figure it out.
Cool. In the meantime, people, read Billy Bat. Have you
No, I don't know what that is.
Oh, well, okay. I'll just quickly, because I'm plugging it, but like Billy Bat is a manga by Naoki Urasawa. He also wrote Monster, 20th Century Boys, and Pluto. Great author, great series. I read it while it was being released, but basically it's in kind of alternate reality or alternate world where Billy Bat is basically a Mickey Mouse equivalent. And it talks a lot about how this character appeared throughout history and influenced the world. And it basically ends with like the company who created him owning half the world, which if you know what's happening to big companies, and Disney is one of them, is not totally far-fetched. But it's also just a really good series. I'd recommend it to anybody who can get their hands on it.
So come back to the Bat Chart podcast next week when we talk about the Mickey Mouse franchise. Oh boy! And until that time, I'm Average Joe.
I'm Beef Pork Ribs.
Catch you on the flip side.
Oh!